But first, Anthony Rendon of Lakewood is elected Speaker of the State Assembly, one of the most powerful political positions in California. He takes over the office in 2 weeks, and he joins us today to outline his agenda.
KABC 7 presents Eyewitness Newsmakers with Adrian Alpert.
Good morning. I'm Adrian Alpert. Assembly Speaker-elect Anthony Rendon, welcome to this program.
Thank you, Adrian.
Well, it is the first of many we hope that we have with you. You were elected to state office in 2012. You were first term, really, the first to be elected under longer terms. And now with extended term limits, you could look forward to 9 years as Assembly Speaker, a long term for the first time in a very long time. Does this change the game plan for your time in office?
I think it does. I wrote the water bond 2 years ago. And that was one of those efforts where we were sort of looking at a lot of longer-term projects, infrastructural projects like the water bond, like school construction bonds, like transportation bonds, those types of things. So we're looking at these long-range projects, but we know we don't have to rush into them, and we can get the details right.
But like your predecessor, I read that Willie Brown from way back when, you don't plan to carry legislation once you are in office on March 7th.
Exactly. I'm not carrying legislation this year. That's a first. Recent speakers haven't done that. You referenced Speaker Brown, who I believe was the last speaker to do that. There's enough work to do in the Speaker's office. I think the work of the Speaker is making sure that the caucus's priorities get through, that the caucus chairs have the tools that they need in order to make their choices and their preferences move the state.
I want to talk about a pressing issue that has just come out this week because it caught some by surprise. I would like to find out if it caught you by surprise, too, because you are a supporter of the bullet train. It was said to be a $68 billion project. And so now changing the beginning route of it, it's now being called a $64 billion project, but to not start around Burbank or Los Angeles, but in fact now San Jose, Northern California. What's your reaction?
Well, first of all, it did take me by surprise. I learned about it the way a lot of Californians learned about it. I voted for the for the bullet train at the ballot, like a lot of voters. I supported it all along. I now have very serious concerns about it. I have very serious concerns about the route, very serious concerns about the viability of it.
Well, can you expand on that? When you say serious concerns, you know that there is an initiative being circulated that could be on the November ballot that would divert the money from the bullet train that's already been appropriated and put it into state water projects. How do you feel about that?
Well, that's some dangerous ground because we passed, the voters passed the bullet train, approved the bullet train, so now we're having voters unapprove something that voters approved, and that's legally tenuous ground. What I was talking about with respect to my concern is now I'm concerned that a lot of voters are going to start abandoning support of the train. It's very serious.
Could this be so serious that you would take it off the table? Could it be unfunded? Can it stop?
I think we definitely need to ask some hard questions. The new plan came out today. I released a statement immediately saying that I was shocked and quite surprised by it. We have seen support for the train erode since voters approved it. And these sorts of decisions that happen without much warning at the last minute that circumnavigate the largest urban area in the state can't be good for the future of that train. Well,
it was the reaction that we got this week when we heard about this was people don't seem to like the project anymore. And it seemed the thinking for changing the first alignment was that there was just too much difficulty getting the land together in the Los Angeles area, so they thought they'd go ahead and just try the Bakersfield San Jose route.
Yeah, that's how I read it too. But the reality is the train does not work unless there is a Los Angeles, either a terminus or some sort of destination in and around Los Angeles. You're going to have to cross that bridge at some point. It makes sense to address that issue now.
So let me just sum this up by saying, do you, when you say have serious doubts, would that be so far as to say we've got to change the project or scrap it?
I'm gonna call the director tomorrow. I found out again, as you did, maybe 2-3 hours ago, about the new route. It was alarming. I fear that if we start to change things, then we lose the federal grant, the federal match. that we've
been. And California would have to pay that back.
Right, exactly. And then what a fiscal mess it would be. So I have some hard questions that I want to ask the High-Speed Rail Commission.
But some might say that without the popular support, a fiscal mess now will be a much smaller fiscal mess than it would be once you're $40 billion in.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So those are the types of questions that I want to make sure I ask the authority.
Well, very surprising on that. Let's talk about a couple of other issues that are going on. You know, you said that there's a culture of the legislature being secondary to the governor, and that you don't see any big changes in that culture until Governor Brown leaves office in 3 years. I didn't mean that to believe that you're not a supporter of Governor Brown, because I believe you are. Yeah. But what did that mean then?
Well, what I meant was over the past 20 or so years, we've had 6-year term limits in California. Some incredibly talented legislators, but folks who just didn't have the opportunity to sort of sink their teeth into their jobs and sort of master a lot of the subject areas. The analogy I always use is sort of in healthcare. Would you want a dentist who could only practice for a short, limited amount of time to sort of go into your mouth and start removing teeth? It's important to have expertise in all of these policy areas. And I think under 6-year term limits, we lost that. And we also lost there was the balance of power between the executive branch and the legislative branch certainly eroded.
So getting back to Governor Brown, how would you describe your relationship with him? Because some do say that the position you will assume on March 7th is second to his, really.
I have a good relationship with the governor. We work very closely together on the water bond. We've had several constructive conversations since I was named Speaker-elect.
So to make this very local, though, Kevin DeLeon, state senator, who is the Senate President pro tem from the Los Angeles area, and now yourself from the Los Angeles area, both Latino, both up-and-comers in the Democratic Party. What does this mean for Los Angeles, having two of the major players in Sacramento now from this area?
I think it's significant. But it's interesting that it's significant given the extent to which we represent 2/3 of the state's population in the South. It's surprising that it hasn't happened before, but I think it's very significant for the state that we're both from the South. It's significant for the state that we're both from Los Angeles and we're both Latino. But what I keep telling people is, the question of whether or not it's significant is an important one and a relevant one. The question that I like to focus on is whether or not it's good. And I think it's good because Kevin and I work with diverse communities, whether they're diverse ethnic communities, people from diverse regions of the state. When I wrote the water bond 2 years ago, I did 18 public hearings from Coachella in the south to Redding and Eureka in the north. I traveled the entirety of the state talking about people about water in their district. So Kevin and I are people who work with people from all different types of backgrounds.
All right. Mr. Speaker-elect, we have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll talk more about water. We'll talk about the LA River right after this.
Eyewitness Newsmakers.
We return with Assembly Speaker-elect Anthony Rendon, and I want to talk about, first of all, your background. You have a PhD in political science.
I do.
And you have chaired the Water, Parks, and Wildlife Committee. You have an interest in the LA River. You have passed a bill now that creates a working committee to look at the lower river. How does this fit in with what LA is doing with the upper river?
I think it fits in very well. I just flew in, as I do every Thursday, and you sort of fly over Los Angeles and you see the incredible development that's happened in the city of Los Angeles portion, where a little green strip of land. Once it gets to the county of Los Angeles part, which is what I represent, you see that white, shocking concrete that is so familiar to us who grew up in Los Angeles and recognize that as the LA River. We want that development to continue throughout the entire corridor, throughout the entire duration of the river. There are 22 miles where not much development has happened, and most of that is in my district.
And how does that fit in with the Frank Gehry overall plan for unifying the river?
I've had 2 meetings with Mr. Gehry. He completely understands what needs to happen in our district with respect to bicycles, with respect to jogging paths and all those types of things. His plan is a plan for the entirety of the river. He's listening to our constituents. He's doing a great job of incorporating our thoughts.
And at the same time, while making it a much more attractive recreational site, it will still have the flood control capabilities. One wonders that concrete was put there for a purpose.
Right, absolutely. I remember not that long ago, and I believe in the early 90s, where the river reached its peak. No, that's certainly something that we need to make sure that's maintained.
So it's accounted for. After you won the speakership, and we have you talking about that, you said getting to work on the governor's budget
right.
was a priority, and the governor has set for his big goals, the reduction in petroleum by spending $1 billion from the cap and trade funds on electric cars, public transportation, to get to that oil consumption reduction by 50% by 2030. Is all this doable?
Absolutely. I mean, so much we try to reduce petroleum by 50%. We already know, just because of the way cars are built today and because of driving patterns of young kids, we're already going to reduce petroleum by about 31 to 33% in the state. So these are efforts to make sure that, A, we get there a little more quickly, and that some communities and industries aren't left behind, and that there's a transition.
And can you tell me why it is that California still has not voted in an oil extraction tax?
It's shocking. I've been in favor of one since I ran the California League of Conservation Voters. Seems to be a political issue.
Well, with Democrats in the vast majority, is that still that difficult to achieve?
Well, we haven't had one introduced in my time in the legislature.
Would you support that if one were?
I'd have to look at the specific proposal, but I've always been in favor of an oil extraction fee.
All right, so let me talk a little bit, too, about some lightning round questions because we're coming down to our final 2 minutes. Health care, Medicare, Medi-Cal. Where does that fit in California, and how do we get more funding there?
Well, something we need to do immediately in the next month or two is to close the MCO loophole, which is something that we're going to try to work on over the next couple of weeks in Sacramento. If we don't fix that, we're going to blow a $2 billion hole in our budget.
And pharmaceuticals would like to get a ballot measure that would stop any kind of cap on what can be charged for medicine. Is there any way to have any discussion about that before that gets on the ballot?
We've looked at that. The proposal that I've seen was sort of incomplete, and it's hard to comment, but I know it's something they're still kicking around.
And finally, legalizing marijuana. That looks like that may go on the ballot to go completely legal. Is that good for California?
I'm in favor of legalizing recreational use of marijuana. There's several competing proposals. I haven't endorsed any of them. I'm going to see which one rises to the top.
All right, Mr. Speaker-elect, I think that they're telling us that we're out of time, and we are just getting into the subject. So please, we know that you are from Los Angeles, that you will be here. We will find you and bring you back on the program, if you will, and then we can talk some more.
I'd be happy to.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you so much
Thanks so
for
much.
joining us.